Okay, welcome back to the second part of the session on the open source telecom software project survey for 2021. Now, I'll start by thanking our sponsors because without them, this doesn't happen. So that's Automart, Arbor Network, GoContact and BroadVoice, who have recently merged, Strolid, Radisys, and Telnix. So thank you for the support. So we're now going to review the general survey that we ran in 2021. After that, we're going to have lots of small videos for each of the project surveys so people can get to the specific project they care about and see the results as fast as possible. So again, we learned from last year, long presentations aren't good for people. Right, so on to the survey. So this, of course, follows on from the two surveys I reviewed in the previous video. So thank you for your continued support. As mentioned, we have a general survey that focuses on security, serverless, stir shaken, barriers and benefits of open source software, telcos and open source software, training, IoT, and some general geographic category information. That's the general survey. And then we asked questions for each of the project surveys, and we got to some more project specific questions in them as well. We had 114 responses to the general survey, more than the previous year. So well done to everybody who gave their time. And amazingly, we had 163 project survey results. Now, that doesn't mean, the 277 total doesn't mean we had 277 people. Really, it was 114 people responded. And then, most people, a few didn't, but most, did at least one, if not two, project surveys. Some did 4 or 5, I think. So again, thank you for your support. And as I mentioned, what we'll try to do next year is just to have a general survey, no project reviews, simply because every other year, I think, is a good cadence. And then when we do the project reviews, we're going to make the general survey very short so that people devote the time to doing the project surveys. Again, you live and you learn. So looking at regions, Europe and North America top as before, as you saw in 2020, but again, growing use and response to the survey from around the world. Again, China, does seem to be that's the rest of Asia. China did do better this year. Sorry, it was 2020. We had relatively few responses, so it was nice to see more responses coming in from China. Now, similar distribution with Europe dominating, and that is thanks to, for example, university support. So Focus has done a great job in producing some amazing people that have contributed, really impressive projects that have made, programmable communications possible. So a big thank you to all those people. Let's face it, North America is the center for programmable communications, yet in terms of responses, it's Europe that dominates. Now, where are most of your customers based? Well, as you would imagine, more in North America now, but Europe still dominates. And that is in part because Europe is a more diverse, competitive market in telecoms. So you've got a lot of smaller telcos that really do benefit from open source software. But as you can see, the distribution is all around the world and it's growing. So every year we're seeing more and more responses coming from outside Europe and North America. It shows we're growing in the right direction, but we've still got a lot more work to do. Now we asked, what category is your business in? So this is the survey responses. Most are consultancies, as you would expect. Most of the core project teams, consulting is their gig, but also a lot of the ecosystem members make money from their expertise in VoIP, real-time communications, WebRTC, and the open source projects. Then communication service providers, so UCaaS, contact center as a service, CPaaS providers, communication software providers. So these provide software to the above and to telcos. Also, what was really nice to see is resellers and channels. So it's not just the geeks, the techs, it's those that are packaging this all up and delivering it to enterprises and telcos, big and small. Telcos, of course, were in here as well with universities. Telcos always under index in this survey, in part because they're influenced heavily by their vendors, and their vendors who generally aren't open source focused tend to go too risky open source. So there is a challenge there, and we'll come back to it when we look at the barriers to open source adoption. But this was a new category, and we'll be tracking it from year to year. And as I mentioned, from Astrocon I've attended, this I've seen as a very important channel. They're at the sharp end. I really learned a lot in terms of where the trends are, where the investments are being made, and where where projects are hitting the ground. So it's always good to chat to the resellers and channels partners at open source project get-togethers. Then, in terms of business category, number of employees. Now, this one surprised me a little. I was just, how many, I always thought it would be dominated by small companies, but it's not. It's actually sort of, medium-sized businesses. Again, you saw that list, you've got consultancies, you've got sort of, some smaller UCaaS, CSaaS providers, they're all in this 100 to 1,000 range. So it was nice to see, these are reasonably sized businesses that are responding. It's not just, onesie twosie startups in this space. It's well-established businesses. Now we asked, what open source or source software do you use? So I just divided it up into, this is web-centric, so of course Ansible. We knew that back in 2019, but also Kafka, Apache, Nginx, Grafana. I've seen that popping up quite a lot in several projects. But it's a long list of different projects. Of course, as you would imagine, OpenShift's Camilio, FreeSwitch, Asterix, Homer, and then the list goes on. Then, of course, all the different Linux distributions, and Postgres dominates on the database. Now, I asked this question here, that it's open source telecom software is part of a suite of projects that are used. Should we look at dominant architectures? I have to be honest, I'm not convinced. Partially because once you start getting into architectures, it's implementation specific. People see that as competitive intelligence. Also, it's very implementation focused. So it's hard to draw something general. I feel just having this list is pretty good. Trying to how far we go down into architectures, I don't know. And there could be, if you have some ideas, get in touch. Let me know what we can do to help identify some common deployment architectures around specific problems or applications. Again, as always with a survey, I put the questions together, but please let me know what questions you want answered. Then we asked about the pandemic. How's it affected your business? Actually, not was the dominant answer. And then, more focused on hosted cloud, more focused on mobile collaboration, less spend. So, people have been impacted, greater voice load. I mean, this is very true for a lot of mobile operators I know. Through the pandemic, they've seen their voice traffic increase, focus on intersite capacity efficiencies, decentralized implementations, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on and on. I mean, more focus on video. I think it's partially the community that answers these surveys, because of the bias to FreeSwitch, Asterix. It's more SIP-centric than WebRTC-centric. So as a result, voice has a more dominant impact in this survey than the video. But it was interesting to see that not impacted was the predominant answer. Now, this is very good. I really like the responses here. This was asking, what do you consider to be the main barriers to using open source? Top one, inadequate documentation. I know for a lot of projects, you consider your documentation to be great. Some will claim that the code is so well written, it's self-documenting. Maybe for you. Unfortunately, for many in the community, it is a challenge. For newbies, and we need more new blood in this community, it can be significantly challenging. SIP is not an easy protocol. So, and even when people are looking for consultants, having consultants not just knowledgeable in, say, free switch, but also in implementation details around VoIP SIP, that's also a challenge. So it's broader in terms of the gap we see, and that's why you see documentation so high. Next was support, training, maintenance, and we're going to do a little bit more sort of review of that, especially around sort of the training in a couple of questions. Complexity. There's a perception that open source is only for geeks, and it's true, absolutely. And you don't pick just one open source project and you're successful in implementing it. You have a competence in using open source more broadly. We're going to come to that again in the survey results later. Also, some organizations are just used to buying. That's what purchasing does. This open source stuff just leaves them confused. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I see it so often where, within telco meetings, where, open source raises its head. There's this sort of sneering from some of the network equipment providers of, it's like, yeah, it's risky, yet the programmable communications industry, Zoom, RingCentral, all those guys show open source works at scale beyond most telcos that are out there. So, but anyway, I don't want to get into my ranting here, but that misinformation is significant and is part of the reason behind telcos under-indexing in the use of open source telecom software. There's, of course, the tradition of buying off the shelf. The misunderstanding that open source, it doesn't mean free. Yes, the software is free, but the support, you've got to have people that have the skills to deploy, modify, maintain. So it's a different beast than basically relying on somebody to provide the software. Again, we've discussed this about the right expert, knowledge, ease of use, and that comes back to all those Ansible scripts I was talking about in 2019. We need more of them. It's 2021. We need lots more scripts to make it as easy as possible for some, a developer to just get a project up and running and to be able to show a call going in and out, within an afternoon. It really needs to be that quick and easy to give them the confidence that this is something that they can run with. Then time versus reward. It does take time. And I've made this point that you need to have a competence in using open source software, not just in Asterisk, not just in FreeSwitch, but a whole range of projects. There's a perception of lack of quality, security. That's BS. That's been shown multiple times. The quality of open source software is higher in my experience. Security is something you need to manage as an enterprise. RTC security, just one of a number of security issues. And we're going to do some more deeper dive in that later, in that section later, and the list goes on. Because there's a good point made here that complex deployments can be more expensive on open source than on license because it's a very specialized area. But this I thought was a really good, so rich set of barriers, which of course, with of course documentation on top, but a whole host of others that I think are significant. Then how do we overcome those barriers? Well, research, education, and testing. long-term objective to building open source competence. Okay, this I think is something that is now being appreciated in the market. You need a long-term commitment to using open source, a commitment to owning the product, its roadmap, its customer experience. You now can move in hours, days, in terms of your customer experience, in terms of your roadmap, then talking to your vendor, persuading your vendor to put it on their roadmap, and then maybe next year or the year after, what you need is available. Now you're in control. You can turn on a dime. And that's why we're seeing success in programmable communications, the RingCentrals, the Twilios, the Zooms, all those companies, they own their product because it's built on open source. And we're even seeing some of the more traditional telcos, such as Gamma, bought Mission Labs. Mission Labs, great team that really understood open source projects, and it built up UCaaS, CCaaS, CPaaS capabilities. And this now gives Gamma a core product division that is expert in using open source. So this now enables Gamma to no longer have to resell BroadSoft and try and make money when the telco that's reselling it, or the enterprise that's using it, and you've got Gamma trying to make money, BroadSoft trying to make money, and then maybe even an integrator in there as well. There's too many shares of the pie these days compared to, say, RingCentral that owns everything and can deliver it for a fraction of the cost. So to be competitive, open source is essential in the telecoms market today. Then looking at some of the benefits of using open source. Dominant, of course, is control over your business. The roadmap, the customer experience. Customer experience is everything, and the understanding that comes from that. There's a community. The community has most probably faced the problems you're facing many times before. Talk to the community. The community wants people to be successful using the open source project, because that ensures the future of the project and ensures that there's always people out there that will be able to help. Of course, customer focus, because you can now customize, own customer relationships, sort of modify your service, configure your service to meet specific customer needs. Speed of response is days, not years. Interoperability because of open source. Innovation, again, these are all things we've seen in the programmable communications industry, compared to telcos, all thanks to open source. More secure because you understand how the security works. You're not relying on a vendor. You understand. You've done the proactive testing. You've done basically a whole range of audits to ensure that what you've built or the customer using is as secure as you're capable of building it. There's no bureaucracy that you find with closed source solutions and negotiations, and the list goes on. But this, I think, is important, that when we're looking at the programmable communications industry, which has been built on open source, all these benefits have enabled the creation of, you'll see in my review of programmable communications, created a $75 billion industry on open source. Then looking at overcoming some of the barriers, of course, documentation, community, then roadmap releases, security audits, consultants, and support contracts. Actually, this low importance to support contracts surprised me a little compared to some of the other results, but different groups respond in different ways, and I don't pretend that we have all the questions asked in as simple and as a clear way as possible. So you do see some slight anomalies between the different questions. We asked around IoT. Are you using open source telecom software for IoT projects? And we had 48 people saying yes, which was great. Then we asked what tools, resources would help. overriding comment was keeping documentation up to date, particularly with new devices. Now, there's a recognition that's an impossible task given all the different IoT devices coming out. However, a subset should be recommended and maintained in a relatively timely way. And then we asked, in your opinion, what IoT projects require open source telecom software. It was all enterprise IoT focused, not consumer. Dominantly, the dominant responses included sort of routers, cameras, door locks, and other access control and security devices. Now, when I was at Astracon in 2019, I was chatting to some of their channel, and this was where they were investing time and energy in the application of Asterisk, in these type of deployments. And as you can see, we're seeing some real world responses from them, successfully getting customers to pay, but also in terms of some of the documentation challenges they're facing. We then asked questions around stir shaken. So have you implemented it? A few said yes, most were no, because it's regional. It's North America. And again, we see whether you have a need for it. It's sort of split in terms of responses, in terms of plan, already implemented. So there was some, but as you can see, through the coming years, some no plan because it's not relevant either to their project or they're not in the North American market. And then have you taken part in the stir shaken interoperability test? Some have. So again, it's a bit of a niche. If you're in the North American market, it matters. But if you're outside of that, it's really a North American phenomenon. Now, how's training supported online and remote, as you would imagine, given the pandemic? Now, as you can see, boot camps, manuals, this one self-documented. Yeah. I've made this comment a number of times at a number of events. For a lot of the community members, they don't make software contributions because they're intimidated. I mean, the core team is just, they're good. This is the reason why they're building the software. So, a lot of the community don't contribute code because it's just like, it would be rewritten by the core team. But what they're most probably far, better than the core team at is documentation. I think we need a way of recognizing documentation contributions to help address some of the barriers that we see there. I'd also say, YouTube videos are important. With TED Hack, we work with a lot of millennials, and they prefer videos to walls of text. You have some documentation, they're just going to look at it and go, what? It really is. I've seen it at too many TED Hacks where they click on the link and it's just documents, and they're just like, okay, I'm going to go somewhere else. With a video, it's got the core essence of what they need to understand. They play it at 2x speed, so they're able to get the key ideas and then grow from there. So, again, I know I'm belaboring the point, but as an industry, we need to grow beyond the core of people we see at the same, open source events year after year. We need more of the people we have in TED Hack coming into the open source community. And that's why I'm a big supporter of the work that Dave Horton is doing with Jambons. He was a sponsor of TED Hack, and I can see the growth in his community and the rich diversity of people on his Jambon Slack that are helping build that project and applying it in a whole range of really cool, interesting ways. We asked, what type of training do you prefer? Now, this is interesting. Now, one of the suggestions was MOOC.org. Now, one of the things around whether people pay or not when they're researching a project for training was interesting. If you're just researching, it's like the assumption is it's free. But once you made a decision to use a project, then they're prepared to pay. So MOOC.org, very interesting that you can learn about a project, you can go through the training, and it's free. Until you want to be certified, you then pay if you want to be certified. Now, if you want to use a project support, one of the challenges many projects have is training through support. You're just getting dumbass question after dumbass question because the person hasn't gone through the training and understood it. So this is a good example where people can do the training for free. So they understand the project and they get confidence, and then they realize, yes, we want to use this project for this specific need. And they can then certify that they've done the training, pay the money, and then they can get support. So now no longer are you training through support, you're using basically the fact that they are now committed to your project as a way of getting cash and then having far more efficient use of your time, because training through support is very inefficient. But as you can see, there's a whole range of ideas and preferences online, as you would imagine, good documentation, tiered to different skill levels. This I see coming in time and time again in the survey responses, is you've got to recognize the noobs and help the noobs get up the learning curve, because it is steep. It isn't an easy, these projects are not simple compared to a lot of open source projects, and we need to help people get up that curve. And then, there's Udemy style stuff, lots and lots of examples with scripts so they can get that example up and running, go, woohoo, I made a call. It's amazing, the delight on people's faces when they get their phone to ring from basically a simple piece of code. How-to videos, again, for millennials, webinars, and of course, there's the on-site. But I definitely, in looking at the massive open online course site, I really thought that is something we should consider within the open source telecom community. Then here's some ideas on pricing, different options for pricing for training. I mean, it does depend on the region, but open source training does cost. It shouldn't be considered free. If you're using somebody's time, they need to put bread on their table for their family, so there should be a fee there. Okay, and that's again why I think the MOOC pricing is very interesting to get people on board, and then when there's a commercial driver, then you use that cash. Now this was very interesting. This is very different to what we had in 2020. In 2020, there were no plans, have jumped up, but also, as you can see, nobody was evaluating anymore. We made a decision. It's not that relevant when it's in the call path. However, we did last year have a very interesting panel discussion by some really smart people, and not me included. But that I definitely recommend having a look through where serverless makes sense, the different application workloads, outside of the call path. And then on pros and cons, you can read these as well as I, but as you can see, the industry's made its decision. For the sake of time, you can look through the slides or just press pause and then read through them. Same on the cons. Basically, it works for some workloads, but for the core media path, no, it's not the right solution. So while we were being laughed at by the fintech guys and being accused of yak shaving, it's for very good reasons that serverless doesn't work with real-time communications. I mean, in time it will, but where we are today, no. And that's why you see the industry has decided over that just 1 year. It's great to see how quick, as a group, we've made the decisions and moved on. Moving on to security. So this is the last section. So we basically asked the question on, with internal security teams, is there one? Generally not. Are they involved in RTC security? Absolutely not. Is it proactive or reactive? Well, guess what? Yeah, it's reactive rather than proactive. Are they responsible for RTC security incidents? No. So what's happening is it's like, oh, this is complex. This is like voice stuff, or, you know, it's whoever's managing that switch over there, that's their problem, rather than being part of an organization-wide security strategy. So again, this is interesting. And again, thank you to everybody who filled this in and gave very frank, open, and honest answers. This really helps us understand where we are as an industry. We then went on and asked, you know, if you're using security testing tools for RTC, you know, what are they? So generally, most people aren't. Then SIP Vicious Pro, SIP P, SIP Crack Suite, Test RTC. And that just shows percentages in terms of you know, the number of times it was referenced. We then got into some of the sort of details around SIP in terms of, are you supporting RSA or elliptic curve TLS server certificates, and it shows where we are today in terms of, yeah, about a third no, and then a third are like, yeah, mañana, sometime in the future. All we're trying to do is capture where we are as an industry with respect to security. We then asked, you know, are you supporting or using encryption, encrypted media? And it shows, you know, basically, you know, yes, no in the future. And as you can see today, it's around SRTP with ESTES key exchange. But, you know, you can still see some of the others are being used. But, you know, again, you know, there's a number of approaches being taken. And we're just capturing where we are around those implementations, and we can track it over the years. More questions around how we're supporting or using MD5, some of the other, you know, like, you know, SHA 256 or 512 based digest authentication around SIP. As you can see, MD5, far more, about a third, you know, on the other approach, and, you know, a third, no. Then are you using or supporting token-based authentication? So, you know, Auth2, generally, no. It's, you know, it really is just a small piece of the market today. But again, we'll track it, see where it's going in the future, because security is important. Then looking at defensive mechanisms for RTC security, best practices. Now, this was a little confusing to me. I think I should just combine SBC's firewalls, breaking it out. I think, you know, again, there are some oddities in the answers, but I think, you know, because, you know, this was a pretty long survey, you know, people getting a little tired and just sort of clicking on stuff that made sense. But as you can see, you know, best practices is the dominant, but then, you know, SBC firewall is next. Then how is security hardening done? Generally internally, at the app or network layer, or both, generally both. And then here you go in terms of what type of offensive mechanisms are used. So scans, manual efforts, you know, internal testing. As you can see, you know, these sort of four, and then it sort of, you know, tails off from there. Then how much of the security efforts are reactive versus proactive? Again, you know, it's just nice to see the honesty in the answers. And are you doing secure code review? Well, generally no. And if we do, it's an internal code review. And then what sort of training is provided for employees? As you can see, again, best practices and awareness are really, you know, in terms of secure development, you know, sort of, you know, more focused applications, generally not. So hopefully that's given you a feel for the general survey results. I know I've raced through it a little, but I'm trying to keep each of these presentations to about 20 minutes to avoid boring people. What I'm now going to do is move on to project-based surveys. So it's going to get a little bit more bitty, but, you know, hopefully it'll be just like sort of 5-minute videos, so you can get in and see the results for, you know, sort of Homer, or, you know, some of the other projects, quickly get to the information you want. So again, thanks so much for listening. I hope you found that useful. I can see we're gathering some really useful information, some very honest, no BS answers to these questions. It really is great to see, where we are, very frankly, as an industry around those topics. And again, some of the pieces I think really got me quite excited was on the barriers to open source and way to addressing those barriers. I think that was a great list. I think if we attack those, we can really make a difference. Thank you.